are here today to attend a really awesome training about writing grant proposals with Kathy Angel, who is extremely experienced in communicating all kinds of things to all different people. And I wanted to offer you this training as the ACE Basin Coastal Training Program Coordinator. My job is to help facilitate all of you who are coastal decision makers, make sure you have the information and tools that you need to do your jobs well. And one of the things that everyone has been repeatedly asking me for is please help us with grants, please help us with grants, please help us with grants. So I thought this was it's a great basic course if you are not used to grant writing, and it is a really good refresher if you're like, I just need some new tips and tricks and get excited again about writing grant proposals. And I'm going to introduce Kathy now. So Kathy Angel is the owner of Kathy Angel Communications, and she specializes in presentation design and delivery for scientists, educators, and public officials. And so she was formerly the coordinator of Washington's state's coastal training program. So same job that I have, just out west, and had it for considerably longer than I've held my position. And she's considered to be one of the most successful training programs in the country for coastal managers. Kathy is nationally known for her transformative methods and received a communications award from NOAA, which is giving out each year in her honor. And she now lives in Bellingham, Washington, which is why she's been telling you good morning, even though she knows we're mostly in South Carolina for good afternoon. So Kathy, I'm going to turn it over to you at this point.
Thank you, Abby. Hi, everybody. Yes, definitely morning here. I even woke up to a little bit of snow. That was unexpected. I'm here in Bellingham, about a half hour from south of the Canadian border. So I just would like to invite everybody to just take a deep breath. I always start my training this way because we live in such a frenetic world right now, and our attention is pulled in a million different directions. So I would invite you to give yourself the gift of bringing your full presence here into this training for the next 2 hours. Push away your phone, turn off any other computer program that you have running, and just give yourself that gift of not being distracted and able to just completely focus on this training. And for my part, I promise that I'll keep it interesting and engaging for you. So I'd like to get to know you a little bit better, and so I'm going to bring up some polls. And this first one is, what sector do you work in? Government sector, nonprofit sector, private sector, or other? And if you have another, put it in the chat. All right, looks like everybody has answered here, so let me share the results. So it looks like the majority of you are in the governmental sector. We have some in the nonprofit, a couple in the private. All right. This next one is, have you ever applied for a grant? Yes, no, not yet, but I plan to. So it looks like we have some pros on the call today, which is awesome. And we have a few people who have never applied and some who plan to. All right. And then the last one is, if you answered yes to that last question, how many of your grant proposals have been accepted? I did put an NA there so everybody at least can click something. And then none, 1 to 3, 4 to 6, 6 to 9, 10 plus. All right, the answers are rolling in. Okay. In the poll and share the results. So it looks like we definitely have a few pros here. Several of you had 1 to 3 accepted, some few 4 to 6, 6 to 9, and we have a few who've actually had more than 10. So that's great. I love it when people who are experienced are in this training, because there are opportunities for you to share as well. So I'm going to bring up a whiteboard. Because there are lots of challenges that come along with doing grant proposals. And so I would like to find out what your challenges are. So if you would please raise your hand, Abby will call on you, and let's make a list here of some of the challenges that you have faced around applying for grants. So just raise your virtual hand down in the reaction button and Abby will call on you.
All right, Rebecca, go ahead.
Something that I struggle with is I find that I may include too much detail. I'm not sure.
Okay, great. Anybody else?
Got one down in the chat there from Annie.
Go ahead and read it out loud because I'm not able to see the chat.
Okay, very good. Okay, Annie agrees with detail. She's not sure about enough, too much. So she may be concerned not including enough.
Okay. Even you pros, anything that you maybe used to have a challenge with, and
I'm going to ask Pam Corwin. You can go ahead and come off mute and tell us what your challenge is.
Can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm. Yes, we can.
Okay. I think somebody had just put it in the chat, but also sometimes when you're applying for grants, you have to come up with match. And I'm not always that well versed in coming up with matching or matches, especially in government grants.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So sometimes that can be confusing.
Okay. And if people would mind raising their hands, we're making this list that I'm going to revisit at the end, so it's more helpful to me if you can raise your hand versus like making a whole list in the chat. Although if you are nervous about that, put it in the chat and Abby will share it.
Yeah, we did have another one in the chat about allocating or finding enough funds for the administrative work. And I have a challenge too that I'll share. I find that it's hard for me to find time to write grants to paint with everything else I have to do.
Yep.
And then Michelle Pate, you can come off mute and share.
I think a challenge too, along with time, like Abby was saying, is there's sort of some routine work, kind of maybe along administrative, but routine management work that sometimes it's hard to find a project, let's say, that's sexy enough that will attract or get that grant funding as well.
Great.
And then I'm seeing Kat Armstrong. Go ahead.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes getting collaboration from other staff members on writing grants, especially if I'm not leading the project I'm writing the grant for, is sometimes difficult, just managing those logistics.
Great. All right. Anything else before we move on? Going once, going twice. Okay. Well, we'll definitely hit some of these, address some of these challenges in the training today, but I will bring this up at the end, so if we need a little bit more time. So this is how it all started for this class. There are so many great projects and so many lousy presentations. So I was talking to a friend of mine and also a colleague who had recently talked to a manager at a state funding agency. And she shared this comment with me that he had made. And she said, you know, you might consider developing a training to address this issue. And of course, that grabbed my attention because I do lots of trainings on how to design good presentations. But so I first decided I would name it this, How to Design a Compelling Grant Presentation. But as I thought about it and got into it a little bit more, I thought, you know, you really can't separate the proposal and the presentation. They're both so closely tied together. So then I changed the name to How to Design a Compelling Grant Proposal and Presentation. And the reason that these two, the proposal and the presentation, are so closely tied together is that you've got to demonstrate that you have a problem and a solution. You need to show that you have criteria, that you're addressing the criteria in the grant proposal, that you and your team are credible, that you have thought through a budget, and that you're a good investment. Because what happens if you skip any one of these? Well, you get zero funding. Now, that has certainly been the case for me, and maybe it's been the case for you too. And in fact, if you have spent maybe hundreds of hours working on a grant proposal that didn't get funded, go down to the reaction button and give a thumbs up. Right. Abby, you might be seeing some people on the participant list who've raised their thumbs. I don't have many on my short little screen here.
I saw a few, yes.
Okay. All right. Well, today we're going to look at how we can really raise our chances of getting funded. And I also want to mention, I want to make sure everybody has the handouts accessible that Abby sent out. And there's one that follows the main points of my presentation called the key point handout. And then there's another one for exercises that we'll be doing as well. So my goal in designing this class was to get inside the heads of the grant reviewers. Now, I've taken grant classes in the past, maybe you have as well, and I really wanted this one to be different. So I spent quite a bit of time interviewing people from several funding agencies around Washington State. And I wanted to find out, what are they looking for? And what are some deeper insights that I could share in a training? Now, I just want to mention here that my main work is in the environmental realm. And you may be representing, a few of you might be representing a sector in a little bit different sector. So I just want to reassure you, don't worry, even though my examples have to do with the environmental realm, all these strategies can be transferred into a whole other topic. So 3 of the people that I interviewed agreed to do some recorded interviews with me, because I really loved what they had to say, and I wanted to be able to share with you kind of from the horse's mouth what they had to say. And one of them is Marguerite Austin, who's the grant section manager with the Recreation and Conservation here in Washington. Another is Jay Krenitz, who's a program manager with the Washington State Department of Fish and Wildlife. And then Libby Geyer, who's a grant reviewer with the Department of Ecology. And I have short little videos and insights from them sprinkled throughout this training, and I think it really adds some richness and depth to the training. So I had 2 course objectives for this training. 1, offer grant applicants deeper insight into what is important to the grant reviewers. And number 2, to make the process of reviewing proposals and watching presentations more enjoyable for the grant review teams. Because I know a lot of people in that world as well. So we're going to have a few modules today. Number 1 is what the review team needs to see. Module 2, how to earn their trust. Module 3, why you need to tell them a story. Module 4, how to structure your presentation. And Module 5, best practices for slide design. So let's start with Module 1, what the review team needs to see. So first of all, who's on the review team? Well, they may be members of the funding agency. They may be experts in, say, academia from around the country or within your state. They might be citizens who serve, say, on a park board who might be involved. And the most important thing to remember is that these are real people. They have feelings. They have positive and negative biases. They can get intrigued. They can be confused, and they can be frustrated. So what I'd like to talk about is how can we impress them and not frustrate the review team. So number 1, follow the directions of the funding guidance. Now this seems really basic, but they were telling me that you'd be really surprised how many people don't actually follow the directions. So that'll help you right there to just follow, because every proposal or every grant opportunity has a list of guidance. Another thing is to put your big idea right up front. Now, what is a big idea? Well, a big idea is the bigger goal, the bigger thing that you want to achieve with your grant. And so you want to put it right up front, because it really frustrates review members if they have to like wade through your whole proposal to figure out what it really is you want to do. The other thing to remember is your big idea is what the funding agency is buying. So let's look at a few examples. Developing Ansich Park will give our residents water access for hand-powered watercraft. So just simple and succinct. You're not getting into the details at this point. By training the professionals who interact with shoreline homeowners, we can reduce the number of bulkheads on Washington's shorelines. Removing the dikes on Lequi Island will help to restore critical marine habitat. Creating a food forest on Charette Street will help make Portland more food secure. So as you can see, these are the essence of what you want to accomplish with your grant. And it's clear, it's succinct, it will stick in people's minds. So now I'd like to give you an opportunity to explore a little bit about your idea. And so you want to get the What is Your Big Idea handout. And now you may be working on a grant, so it'll be easy to do this. You may just have an idea. So even if you aren't working on a grant, just think of something. Imagine something that you might want to write a grant for and work on what your big idea for that might be. And so I'm going to turn off my video for 3 minutes and give you 3 minutes to think about and fill out your sheet on what your big idea might be. And then we'll come back and do a little bit of sharing around that. So I'll see you in 3 minutes. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to stop the share and come back to the main room. And so if you're here, if you're back with me here, go ahead and turn your video on so I can see you. And what would be helpful is if a couple of you would mind sharing what your big idea is. This is how we learn, is by sharing with each other. I can give you some feedback if you like as well. So raise your virtual hand. And let's hear from a couple of you about what your big message is, or your big idea. Okay, Kristen.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, perfect. So I said replacing the water lines in X neighborhood will provide safe and reliable water source and service to residents.
Beautiful. Short, succinct, clear. It paints a picture. So in my mind, if I was a reviewer, I would hear that. I would that fast know where you're going with this grant proposal. Thank you. Somebody else? Even if you're struggling with it, it doesn't have to be perfect, because this is what I'm here for. I can help you simmer it down if we need to.
Yep. Pam Corwin with her hand raised.
Okay. By creating visual props and printing publications, the angling public will understand the importance of oyster shell recycling and building oyster reefs.
Great, great, beautiful. You tell them right up front kind of the direction you're going at. Great, thank you. One more? Okay, Rebecca.
Okay, my little big idea is representative of the thing I struggle with on grants. It's almost funny reading now what came out of me in 3 minutes. Hearing what you said about someone else with short, succinct, clear, this is not. So here's the big idea. A mobile greenhouse will provide shelter throughout the seasons for native plants rescued from development sites and enable easy access to target watersheds for communities of residents who need help deciding what to plant in order to rewild the Lowcountry, boost biodiversity, filter and store stormwater runoff, capture carbon, and mitigate the urban heat island effect, period. It's like 10 different things. I feel like it's a lot.
Here's the thing to remember about the big idea. It's just the overall ultimate thing that you want to be funded for. And so all those other details, you can include those in the rest of your grant proposal. So if you looked at what you just wrote and just pulled out, what's the essence? What's the thing you're wanting them to fund? So go ahead and try it again.
That would be a mobile setup that provides access to target communities for native plants.
Okay, and so providing a mobile setup for communities who need to learn more about native plant or will help people. So what you're wanting them to fund is the mobile. It is the mobile what? The mobile.
A greenhouse. Yeah, mobile greenhouse.
A mobile
setup.
greenhouse. Oh, okay. A mobile greenhouse will help that we can take into communities, will help residents there understand. Okay, now what? Fill in the blank, or will help them
revegetate the low country faster.
Perfect. Yay. Yeah. Very good. So that you just got to the essence of it. You just want them to visualize the bigger picture. Okay, that greenhouse going into communities and helping them with this bigger issue. Now, all those other things you have, which is good, you know all that, you can now put that into the rest of your proposal. Good. Excellent. Thank you. All right. It really helps. It's so instructive when people share in this class. So thank you for doing that. So here's another take on the big idea by Jay Krenitz, which I thought was so valuable. So let's hear from Jay.
So we were talking a little bit about what's in your class and how you want to have the students talk about their big idea, right? But you also want to make sure, and it's just as important to understand what the big idea or a few big ideas are of the grant program, because those grant programs are passionate about what they want to do as well, and they want to do things that change the world or improve our lives or improve something. And so you really want to know what that is, what they care about. And then it's not about trying to make your thing artificially fit within them, but you want to find the thing that is a really good match so that you can articulate your big idea and how that is a good match, and make sure that it is a good match as you go into that, and then construct your story around that, because then you're speaking to what you care about and what they care about, and that's a great thing to do.
So the recap on that is, how does your big idea fit with the big idea of the funding agency? Number 3 is to show how your project fits the funding criteria. Every grant invitation that comes out is going to have special priorities, immediate needs. So you know what's important to that funding agency. So it's really important to show how your project meshes with that funding criteria. And if it doesn't mesh, it's probably not the best fit. Marguerite has some additional words of wisdom about this.
We asked them to write their responses into our data system. So having just completed a couple of those, here's what evaluators say about that. They say it's extremely important that the applicant respond to the criteria. Sometimes an applicant will look at the question and then they get busy adding a lot of factual data, and before you know it, they've used up their space and they didn't even address the criteria. The other one that frustrates an evaluator is when an applicant uses a lot of additional words instead of being concise, straightforward, and to the point. That is a frustrating thing. Or when an applicant uses a one-sentence answer. When they do something like that, oftentimes it feels like it wasn't important to that community. they answered, they didn't invest anything into their responses, and they didn't address the criteria.
So a recap on that is to leave room to answer all the criteria and be succinct. So here are a few more tips for written proposals from Jay.
So do you have any tips for people around specifically the written proposal?
Yeah, try to be a good writer or get one to help you out. Writing is so important. A lot of times these review processes make for a lot of reading. There's people that are going to sit down with a lot of printed or digital material. So a good writer, somebody who does have a good voice, has a good narrative, it's really important to make sure your grammar is correct, your spelling is correct. Don't make errors in your writing, because that could tank your project right there. That lowers your credibility and your ability to gain that trust of the review team.
Do you have a
Sorry.
preference about when you're reading a grant application? Is it coming from I or we or something different?
You know, I actually struggle with that a little bit. My biggest kind of pet peeve or thing that I don't like is in my fields, there's a lot of scientists, and their voice is so passive all the time. Data were collected, things were done, and I really want to encourage people to use an active voice and talk about their role in that thing or what their project is going to accomplish. And so, you know, try to have as an active of a voice as possible, but you want to maintain a professional tone. And so the I's and the we's, it can be a little more impersonal. So yeah, I don't always know exactly what's the right fit, but like I'd said, I'd try to balance that. I try to be professional, but not overly stilted, and don't be passive, be active.
So make sure that your grant is well written and uses an active voice, not passive. And sometimes I've been asked about, well, should that be I or we or our team? And I would say usually since it is a team, either we or our team and so. Okay. Now, one thing that's important to know is, and in fact, a couple of you mentioned on the challenges list, that sometimes you don't know if you're the right fit for a grant, and you can waste a lot of time on working on a grant that's not a good fit. So the good news is that every grant has a grant manager or a contact person who's there to answer your questions. And so this was kind of news to me when I was interviewing them. I just didn't realize that, you know, you can actually call and talk to them. And so the kinds of things they're going to want to know are, what is your scope of work? How did you arrive at your cost? Who are your intended users? And so if you have the answer, if you know the answers to these questions, then it really saves time. They're not trying to weed through and figure out exactly the answers to these questions. So come prepared and then make the most of best use of their time. Marguerite has a few more words to say about this.
Probably the biggest pet peeve is when an applicant ignores the advice that they've gotten from the evaluators or the advisory committee. So if an advisory committee member suggests that you get a little bit more information about a particular thing, it really bodes much better for your project if you go through the effort to get that info, or you clarify that you might have gone after that particular info, but you've learned that permit does not apply to your project, or in your community you have to do it a particular way, or it's this materials that would be allowed based on your permits. So you need to be able to respond to whatever it is they ask you during that technical review And then if it's something that you can't change or modify, having just a brief sentence to explain why goes a long way to helping them to know that you didn't ignore their advice. You incorporated what you could, and the things that you couldn't, you're letting them know why.
So the recap, follow the advice given to you. If you can't follow it, explain why. And so as you notice, she was referring to, there are some grants where they will actually send an advisor to talk with you beforehand. They might come visit your site. And so again, that's where you pay close attention if they're making any suggestions to you about your proposal. Number 6, demonstrate that you understand the big picture. And so, for instance, if you have a project going on, show them that you understand the complexities of it. So, for instance, how is your project affecting nearby natural features? Or how might it be affecting neighbors or communities nearby? So just, again, show them that you understand that big picture. You also want to demonstrate that you understand the audience and their concerns. And so this is where you get to demonstrate that you've done a little bit of legwork and you've gone to talk to the people that your project might be impacting, and show that you understand their concerns, and then maybe give some ideas about how you would actually address their concerns. Number 8, demonstrate how your project fits with your program's priorities. Now, this funding agency might be prepared to give you a lot of money. And so you need to be really clear that whatever it is you're proposing is under the mandate or being accepted and supported by your organization. So for instance, here's an example of something from the city of Gig Harbor, where they say it's the goal to preserve and enhance opportunities for physical and visual public access to shorelines. So that would be an example of your program's priorities that you'd want to make sure your project fell within. Now, if you're asking for money for a phase 2 project, you want to be able to explain to them what you accomplished in phase 1 that would help them make a decision about phase 2. For example, let's say that you got money for phase 1 to build a rain garden in your community. So you'd want to share with them how much was invested, was it effective, what did the community get out of it? You know, did it prevent flooding in nearby communities? This is where you get to show some data that you've collected from phase 1. Then, and if you can show that data and show some of the successes, you're much more likely to get funding for phase 2. You also want to show that your team, you want them to know we like each other and we work well together. And you might do that again by putting a photograph in your presentation, or you might have other people on your team if you are giving a presentation, have others on the call ready to answer questions. But people can kind of pick up a vibe on how, and if it's just your proposal, you might talk about a little bit about work you've done together and why you're excited, what you want to accomplish. But that actually is one of those sort of subtle things that can go a long way. In number 11, you want to visually convey your project. So it might be using a map, using a photograph, including this with your proposal. Again, this isn't just presentation. This is actually what you're including and attaching to your written proposal. If you have say you want to build this structure in a park, but your small community doesn't have the money to hire an architect to draw up plans, well, you can just go to another town that might have a similar structure or another park in your community and take a photograph of that and use that instead. That's just fine. Number 12, you want to show that you have others on your side. They want to see that you have done the legwork to reach out to other groups who go beyond the choir. And so you can show you've actually done some deeper exploration and have support from, say, farmers or tribes or state agencies. And then you also want to show them that you understand the relationships, sort of the subtleties of relationships say between the tribes and local jurisdictions. Then you want to show that you want to show your passion and excitement for a project, because this is a kind of thing that kind of can go to the heart of the reviewers. Now, I was talking to Libby Geyer, one of the grant reviewers, about my class when I was developing it, and I was kind of going through some of the slides and showing her what I'd come up with. When I got to this slide, she actually got very excited, and she said, I have a perfect example for this. So she told me her story, and I said, can I, record you right now to tell, and will you tell that story so I can share it with my class? So here's her story about this.
Tell me about this whole idea about people showing their passion in their work.
Well, Kathy, I have to tell you, I have a relevant example. Just yesterday, somebody was talking to me about their proposal and their presentation, and he sounded bored the whole time that he was telling me about this great project, right? And the project is still great, but I'm listening and trying to pay attention and trying to be excited. But if he sounds bored while he's talking to me about it, it's kind of boring. In contrast, we had a community group that came, and you could just feel the passion from the presenter. It's a retired citizen that had pulled together all of these neighbors in this community group about a property that they cared about a lot. It was a waterfront property that they hadn't really done anything with this waterfront property over the last 20 or 25 years. And this neighborhood group felt so passionately about it that they started coming together and coming to meetings and figuring out, what can we do with this property, and how can we engage with this owner, and how can we, make a better future for our island. And when he was, his wife was talking over his shoulder, and when we closed the presentation out, everybody that was in the room said, oh, that is such a great project.
So now I'd like to give you an opportunity to just a quick exercise of why are you passionate or excited about your project? And so if you have a project, even if you're, thinking about funding, or maybe you have a project from the past that you've gotten grant support from, take a minute and type in the chat why you are passionate or excited about your project. And then Abby will share some of your responses. Is it helping to save a resource? Is it, or an animal, or?
Here we go. All right. Jackie had to give us a lot of reasons why they're passionate. Okay. They have a project, Monarch Butterfly Genetics, in South Carolina, and they love protecting endangered species and a potentially native population. It's important to retain our natural resources and beauty. They've also watched their daughter watch monarchs go from caterpillar to butterfly and want future generations to enjoy this. So
awesome.
That's one. And then I'm seeing from Chris. Chris believes in the value of community interaction and establishing long-term relationships. Kat is passionate about outdoor education projects and being able to get students outside after they've been stuck in Zoom or in classrooms for so long. Annie Boyd loves getting kids outside and learning about their environment. Lelia enjoys learning and doing programs about archaeology and nature, wants the kids to enjoy a lot of things about kids, man. Kids make everybody excited. Pam is also working with kids and adults, different learning styles, and loves getting those different learning styles into what Team Fish is doing for a grant for visual props and publications. It's important to show visually why it's important. Meg with our archaeology team in South Carolina says it's about preserving cultural heritage for current and future generations, and also using the archaeological record to change or correct history.
Love it. Those are awesome. Great. Thank you for sharing. So that's an important thing to really think about when you're going into this. We often think about grant proposals as sort of being, dispassionate and very, kind of cut and dry. But What I'm hearing is show them your passion. They want to hear that. Okay, so we've talked about what the review team needs to see. Now let's talk about how to earn their trust. So here are the big three that I really pulled out from the interviews I did with people. Number one, present a strong project. Show that the agency's money will be invested well, and demonstrate how your team is credible. Now, one person I was talking with said, you don't have to come off like a used car salesperson. You know, you really just sell the project by demonstrating its merits. And so how do we demonstrate a project's merits? Well, one way is through measurable outcomes. So here's some examples of measurable outcomes. 1, install 10 dog waste stations throughout the park. 2, monitor site for 1 year to document dog waste on the ground. And 3, develop an educational program to present at 3 community meetings. So you can see they're very clear, very measurable. If they fund you, these are the things that you're going to do. Number 3 is to be honest about uncertainties. They don't expect there to be no obstacles, no bumps. They don't expect that. They just want you to know that you see them and maybe have some ideas about what to do with them. So Jay has some ideas and comments about this.
I find that the most effective ones are the ones that are really honest, right? That they anticipate some of the uncertainties or some of the issues around what their project is. And if you can anticipate that, because the reviewers often they're going to see that. They're evaluating your projects and where you're coming from and you, right, as a credible person or team who's going to deliver that. And so it's not that there are never going to be issues with the project or there's never going to be uncertainties, because there always will. It's really good when I see people identify what those uncertainties are or what those potential pitfalls are and talk about them and address like that they have a plan to address those things. It's not that they're going to figure it all out. They know it. It's not an issue. Be honest, talk about the issues and say that you're going to address them and convince the review team that you're the ones who can address that issue and that you're the best ones to do that.
So the recap on that is show that you have a plan to address issues, and this is what builds credibility. So we've learned now how to earn their trust. Now, module 3, why you need to tell them a story. Well, first of all, people love stories. We're humans. People have been telling stories for, millennia. And the thing about stories is that they help drive the information deeper into people's long-term memory banks. And so you want those reviewers to remember you, remember your project. And so Nancy Duarte, in her book Resonate, says, stories help an audience visualize what you, I got my little screen's covering this up. Stories help an audience visualize what you do or what you believe. They make others' hearts more pliable. Now, there are different ways to tell a story. So the way I'm going to teach today is just 3 easy parts: the setup, the problem, and the solution. So let's break this down. The setup is where you talk about this and this are true. You're just kind of telling people what the status quo is. Now, I have a story that I'm going to go through. Now, I've made up this story, so this is fake news, but it's a story that illustrates how to do this. So the town of Russellville has this amazing park called Central Park, and it has extensive walking trails. And every year we get over 600,000 visitors. Now, of those visitors, 200,000 are dog owners. And of those, we figure about 25% or 50,000 people do not pick up their dog waste. Okay, so that's the setup. This and this are true. Now, here's the exposition of the problem. So this amounts to over 50 tons of dog waste that is left to decompose in the park. Now, it doesn't just stay where it is, but it actually sends nutrients and bacteria into the water bodies in the park. Now, our water doesn't look like this yet, but it's well on its way to looking like this if we don't do something about the problem. And this is really a health issue for people and wildlife. Now, we in the Parks Department really have a commitment toward clean water. So we wanted to get to the root of this problem. So we surveyed over 500 dog owners, and we wanted to know, why were they not picking up after their pets? And so this is what they said. We found that either they forgot their bags or there was no convenient place to dispose of the waste. Okay, so that's where we told what we did about it and exposed the problem. Now here's a solution. Here's what can be done, and this is how we can do it. So we're recommending that dog waste stations located throughout Central Park will improve water quality and protect the health of our residents and wildlife. Okay, remember that big idea? This is the big idea for my story. Clear, very clear, and then I'd support this with the details. So the three parts are the setup, this and this are true, the status quo, the problem, here's what's wrong with the status quo, and then the solution, here's what can be done, and this is how we can do it. Now, once you have your story put together, you can slice and dice it to work it through your grant. And the way you do that is by answering the criteria in the form. You'll be able to tell different parts of your story as you answer the criteria. Nancy Duarte says that you really want that story to be what is and what could be. And this creates some tension between what is and what could be. And the review team, wants to know, okay, here's the problem. What are you proposing we do about it? That keeps them engaged. So then we're going to do a 3-minute exercise. What is your story? So think about, what is your story? And you'll need your handout for this. And again, you may or may not be working on a grant. Just pick something. Pick something important that you're working on in your work and that you could see maybe getting some additional funding for. What would that story be? And I'm going to work in a 5-minute bio break into this. So that I'm going to turn off my video for a total of 8 minutes. And so that'll give you a chance to work on your exercise. And then we'll come back and do a little bit of sharing. So when my video comes back on, that means we're going to be ready to start. So I'll see you in 8 minutes. All right, welcome back from break. If you could turn your videos on so I know you're back, we will get started. And we're going to have a little bit of a group discussion again. So like we did for the big idea, I would appreciate if anybody has just the rough bones of a story they'd like to share. It would be helpful to hear it. So anyone like to share, just raise your hand and we'll call on you. And it doesn't have to be perfect. You don't have to tell it like a story, just kind of the concepts, like what would be the kind of the setup, what would be the exposition of the problem, and what would be the solution. Kat.
Okay, this is kind of generic, but sort of the idea is that tourism is a major economic driver in this area, and people are coming here for our beaches and outdoor recreation and the beautiful environment that we have. The problem is that sometimes tourists coming here don't know proper beach etiquette or aren't cleaning up after themselves. And so what we'd want to do is create an educational campaign and partner with hotels in the area to promote it, like on TV screens and in brochures, to educate tourists about beach etiquette and why caring about our environment is so important to our community.
Beautiful. That follows, you set the problem or the current status, the problem, and the solution. Very good. Thank you. Anybody else? Going. Jackie.
Okay. And this isn't even something that I'm actively working on. It's a grant that may happen later that other people have been working on mostly. This is about the monarch butterflies. So monarch butterflies are in decline throughout their range and listed as endangered or threatened. We have monarchs here in South Carolina that are soon to be part of the Eastern North American population that make a fall migration to overwintering grounds in Mexico. However, there may be a subpopulation of monarchs here in South Carolina that do not make the fall migration and overwinter here in South Carolina. If this is the case, we need to make sure we can differentiate between populations and have measures in place to protect this subpopulation. So we will test genetic samples from monarch butterflies in South Carolina to see if there's a genetic difference between potential local monarchs that overwinter in South Carolina and those in South Carolina throughout the rest of the year that are potential migrants, part of the larger North American population.
Great, thank you. Now let me ask you this: what is your key message, or your big idea?
I guess the big idea is testing the genetic samples from monarch butterflies in South Carolina will help us better understand if there is a subpopulation here in South Carolina that overwinters.
Perfect, great, that's great. So that last, when you get into the solution part, it's great just to restate that really clearly, and beautiful. Thank you, y'all. That was great. All right. So we've learned now why we need to tell them a story. Now let's talk about how to structure your presentation and then how you would incorporate that story. Now, let's assume that you have 12 minutes to give a presentation. And now Marguerite particularly stressed that the introduction should be no longer than 30 to 60 seconds, because she says you're not being evaluated on your introduction. You're being evaluated on the body. So you want to put the bulk of your presentation to handle the body and going through the different criteria. Then the conclusion also would be short, again, 30 to 60 seconds. So I'm going to use my example of with the dog waste stations and show you how I would kind of redice that for a proposal presentation. Oh, but before I do that, I have a question for you. When people walk up to a mic, what words usually come out of their mouth? Go ahead and type in the chat. What do you kind of expect to hear when people walk up to the mic and start talking? And Abby will share your responses.
So this is on. Welcome. Oh, hi. And they might introduce themselves, do a greeting and introduction, do a test.
Yep, exactly. You know, hi, my name is, oh, I'm so happy to be here today. Is this mic on? Things like that. These are called meaningless pleasantries by Roger and Amy Ains, who wrote a great book called Championing Science. And that is what people expect. That's boring. So what I want to encourage you to do is to start off kind of right in, kind of off with a bang, and rather than just wasting time with what's called meaningless pleasantries. So in your introduction, first you want to grab people's attention, then quickly introduce yourself and your team. And this is the point where if you want to say thank you or acknowledge them, that's where you do it, is right then, but not right when you start. And then you want to spell out your big idea. So again, using my example, let's see how that would work. Untreated dog waste is polluting the water in Central Park and posing a health hazard for people and animals. I'm Jennifer X with the Parks Department, and I'm joined today by Philip and Kelly, who will be around to help answer questions at the end of our presentation today. And we would like to share with you why we think dog waste stations located throughout Central Park will improve water quality and protect the health of our residents and wildlife. Okay, so that was the intro. Short and sweet, grab their attention, quickly introduce yourself, and state what your key message is. Now the body, this is where it's 10 to 11 minutes. This is the summary of your kind of key points. Now you may have submitted even 100 pages of documentation for your proposal, and they may have that nearby and may refer to it at some point. But really, if you're giving an actual presentation about your proposal, you want to hit your key points here, and you want to follow through their criteria. Now, this is an example of possible criteria that might be included in a funding request. So what Marguerite says is that on the project need, that she expects people to usually spend 25 to 40% of their time on project need. Now, this is not where you get into the budget. This is where you're talking about your community. You're setting the stage for demographics and what's missing and what's needed, and kind of painting that picture. So for instance, how I might put my story into the project need is go through the story that I told you about the visitors and the dog waste issue and the waste, and that could all be under project need, telling that part of the story. Now, another one might be site selection, and I want to mention here that it's helpful to reviewers if you just put a little label on your slide for whatever criteria you are addressing in your slide, and it doesn't have to be big. It can be just real subtle. Here's an example about how one person did it. Now, I reviewed a bunch of grant proposals as part of developing this grant class, and here was a presentation that I looked at that had this big bar across the top of every single slide with all this information. It was just too much. It took up too much real estate. It was repetitive to look at. So really, you can stay small with your label on your slide. Here's an example of budget. And this is, again, you may go in way more detail in your proposal, but for the purposes of the review team and going through your presentation, just have the primary budget items. You might have match, and Libby Geyer said that she likes to know if the match is secured or unsecured. Like, it's okay, even if it's unsecured, it's just something that she likes to know. Now, the conclusion is, again, very quick. You quickly restate what is and what could be, again, your big idea, and why funding your project will make a difference. So Central Park is currently on the path toward being a public health risk. Bacteria and nutrients from dog waste are contaminating the streams and harming wildlife habitat. And this is why we would like to receive funding for the dog waste stations located throughout the park will improve water quality and protect the health of our residents and wildlife. All right. So we've now talked about what a review team needs to see, how to earn their trust, why you need to tell them a story, how to structure your presentation. Now let's look at some best practices for slide design. Now, if any of you have taken my slide design classes, there'll be a little bit of review here, but these are important things to know when you are putting your proposal together, for your presentation together. First of all, can the review team see your slides? Because they may be looking at your slide presentation on a laptop. They might be in a room with a big screen, a big widescreen TV. But you need to think about, put that in your consciousness when you're developing your slides. Can they read them? So for instance, you wouldn't want to just take a PDF right out of your grant report, or not grant report, like a research report of some sort, and just pop it in there. It's way too hard to see, way too many details. So what you'd want to do is pull out the information that's important off that slide. They don't need to see that you're able to develop graphs. That's just the important thing they need to see is what the pertinent information is. The other thing is, it's really tempting to want to put multiple images on a screen, but it's way more impactful to only have one. So see how you feel differently in your body looking at this slide and looking at this slide. So how do you feel differently? Go ahead and type your answers to that question in the chat, and Abby will share a few of your thoughts. So how do you feel differently between this one and this one?
Okay, so I am seeing that you feel like you're at the site, the second picture, as more immersive. You feel like you're there in the forest. One slide is more impactful. I think someone is saying they don't see a difference and they just like that both shows what is happening. And then something is saying it's easier to focus on an issue instead of trying to bounce around from image to image. First slide is crowded.
Yep, absolutely. You get the idea here. When we're looking at multiple images, first of all, we're not quite sure where to look. Also, we just see 4 images sitting on a slide. But when we enlarge one, suddenly you're in the picture, you're immersive because you're immersed in the slide. Because again, part of what our goal is here is to engage the grant reviewers. Now think, these people have been, if you're applying for a grant that needs a presentation, imagine those grant reviewers sitting in a room together usually, or individually at their laptops, and looking at presentation after presentation after presentation. So you want to do these things that are going to help them feel engaged and immersed and make your presentation memorable for them. And here's a little brain science for you, and that is typically when you're looking at a slide with lots of bullet points or lots of information, you only remember 10% in 3 days. But if you're looking at a slide that goes along with what the person's saying, that's a large slide, and you're immersed in it, you can remember up to 65%. And so those statistics from brain scientists are so convincing to me that it's so important to use the large images. And that's one of the simplest things we can do when we're putting our slides together. The other thing is, again, make sure they can see your graphs. And you want to do some things that will also make it easier for people to take the information from your graph in, and that is having a sentence at the top of your graph, such as non-native eelgrass is increasing faster than native eelgrass. So do some things that help them quickly understand the point of your graph. Another thing is to only have one concept per slide. So for instance, if you have a graph, just in one concept, just focus on that one thing, put your explanatory sentence up at the top, and just focus on that one thing before going on to the next slide. You might just have a photograph that you talk about, or a map. Now you might have some points, and if you have points that you need to make, just make them short and succinct, and you can have them come in right over this map, or if you can't see the points very well, put a little box behind it so they pop out, or you could even have a couple points under. Now, one thing that some of the grant reviewers said is that it's okay to have some text on a slide, but don't have more than 1 or 2 or maybe 3 points that you're making. Start a new slide if you have more points. Number 4 is that it's important to show diversity in your slides. And Marguerite has some great words of wisdom about this.
And when we talk about diversity, we're talking not just diversity in terms of different ethnic groups or races, but it also includes people with disabilities, people that are older adults. Who are you trying to serve with that project? And one crucial way to show diversity is when you're addressing community support. So if you're trying to do something that's specifically designed for your teenagers and your youth, well, did you have a charrette or a public meeting or a design meeting where you brought together the youth to tell you what they want or to design things out? Take pictures so you can show them. That helps people to understand the diversity of what you're trying to provide and who you're trying to serve with whatever proposal you're bringing forward.
So include photos of the audience you're trying to serve and show how you've reached out. The other thing is, and that some of them said, and again, Marguerite was one of the ones who pointed this out, was to use minimal animation. Now, if you've observed how I do my slides or taken any of my classes, you know I am big on simple animation because bringing things in as people are reading or helping people know where to look on a slide. Well, the point she made is that if someone a grant reviewer says, hey, could you go back to, you know, this particular section, and you have to go backwards in your slides, you don't have to go through, if you had a lot of animation, you'd have to go through all that animation. So just keep it kind of minimal. And when I use animation, I just like to use the appear function. So you just click you just click and it appears. It doesn't need to fly in, it doesn't need to bounce in, because that's all very distracting. So just very simple animation. The other thing is to watch acronyms and jargon. Now remember, these people who are on the panel may be completely familiar with your organization or agency, or they may be from a whole other part in the country, or they may not have a clue at all. And so it's really important to spell things out. So you really want to watch the acronyms and the jargon. And just as a little test here, can you think of any acronyms for an agency or anything that you are sure everybody would know this? So if you can think of anything, go ahead and type it in the chat.
Like, you're getting some good acronyms. EPA, IRS, DNR, FBI, ASPCA, DHEC.
Yep. Okay, those I would say you'd be probably
CIA.
safe with the CIA and the IRS. Those are really good, but you'd be surprised. People, if it gets more complicated, then I mean things that people are so clear about, just spell it out. It's way better just to go ahead and spell it out. And sometimes, depending on, especially if it's jargon, you might spell it out. Some people think, well, let me just spell it out one time and then put the acronym in parentheses. But the thing is, if that's a new term for people, you're just making them think and work too hard. And hearing it once, they're not going to necessarily remember. But just best practice, if you can, to spell it out every time, unless it's this long, and then spell it out a couple times and then use the acronym.
Kathy, I do real quick, because someone said DNR in the time I took this training before, and they were like, oh, everybody knows that means Department of Natural Resources.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had several folks, when I say I work at DNR, they've been like, do not resuscitate.
Yep.
So just sharing that with my DNR folks.
Yep, exactly. Thank you. We're all in our own little realm, right? And these terms are so familiar to us, but you get out of that. Just even our agency, and just even another environmental agency might not know, or might not be clear about what that is. See, there was one more point I wanted to make about that. Oh, I know. Several of them said that, say when you're in your proposal or you're in your presentation, that it gets really confusing if you say refer to other agencies or other grant funders who've given you funding, and you just use their acronym. They said that gets really confusing. So just even when you refer, you're referring to other people that you work with, other jurisdictions, other agencies. Again, spell it out. The other thing they appreciate is if you can number your slides, because that way, if they need to say, could you go back to slide 114, then it's easy to go back. And they can make a little comment about that if they need to go back. The other thing is to share your successes. Okay, now I know that those of you who have done grants, there's a reporting cycle. So, say it quarterly, or biannually, you have to send in a report of what you've accomplished with the grant money. But what people often don't think about is that even after that grant is over, think about sharing your successes, just sending a photograph to them. In fact, Jay waxed poetic about this person in Seattle who occasionally, the grant's been over for a couple years, but the community is still, things are still happening because of this program they built with that grant money. So this person in Seattle will just occasionally send a photo, maybe just with a couple words, and it just is so awesome for Jay because he says now he has something he can share with the legislature if they're asking for more grant monies. It's something that they can put in a newsletter, put on their website. And so think about as you go into the future and to just keep a relationship with those grant funders. And when you go back, they're going to remember you too if you go back to ask for more money later. The other thing is to remember the people who you talked to in the beginning, like the people who might in a town that might be affected by this grant project, and you went and asked them for support. You ask them for their concerns and that sort of thing. Sometimes that we do that and then we never go back. We never circle back. And that really hit home for me when I was interviewing one of the grant funders, or one of the agencies who actually received funding. It's a nonprofit here in Washington. She said, we received a grant for $2 million. And we spent time talking to the people in the community. We did our big $2 million project, and we never followed up. We never went back and said, look, this is what we did with the support that you gave us. So don't forget about your audience and the people in your community. So here's some parting words from Jay.
I've seen people come to our program multiple times, again and again, and not always be successful. And in the end, sometimes it's just a matter of timing or perseverance or making sure that you get it right. And so don't be surprised if you go through a grant program and you haven't done it before and you don't make it the first time. And then ask for that follow-up, talk with the grant program, find out how you could do things better, and then come back. And you might find that you'll be successful in the future.
All right. So what I'd like to do now is to create some breakout rooms and split you up for just a few minutes to talk with each other about a couple things. One is, and you might want to write this down because I found that when people go into breakout rooms, they kind of space out and they forget what it is they were supposed to do when they went in there. So introduce yourself. And then number two, share one thing that you learned today that you are especially excited about implementing in the future for a grant. So I'm going to make about, let's see, I'm going to make about 14 breakout rooms. Click through here real quick, check. All right, so there will be most groups will have about 3 people in a room. And so again, what I'd like you to do is to just share. I'll give you about 6 minutes or so to do some sharing. And and this is an opportunity too, if you get through what each of you got out of it and just have a discussion. You're going to have people with different experiences in your breakout room, so this is a good time to share some knowledge that way too. So I'm going to open the rooms, and you just need to click on them to join. You need to click on the join button. All right.
This meeting is being recorded.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Go ahead and mute if you're unmuted. All right. Always like how everybody's smiling when they come back from the breakout rooms. I hope you found that helpful to chat with each other. Anybody, did anything come up in your room that you just want to bring up in the group today? Any themes that emerged, or anything you want to mention? Like, was there a certain best strategy or practice that seemed to be recurring? Go ahead and type in the chat or raise your hand. Okay, reaching out to the grants manager. Okay. Pamela?
Hey, so I don't know if it's a difference in how a lot of grants are versus, like scientific versus going for other grants, but Stephen and I both work for DNR, and we had never seen where a grant proposal is also accompanied by a presentation. This is so new to us. And I've written grants and I've never had to do that. Is that something that's becoming common, or is it only for certain grants that you're going after?
It seems like it's for certain grants. The different funding agencies I talked to, I would say, gosh, I would say probably 60% of them required some type of a presentation. So, and does anybody else have any thoughts about that they want to share? It might be becoming more common, but again, I think it kind of depends on the the funding agency. Okay, I'm just looking at a few others. Reaching out, grant writing is a team effort. Always work with a partner to proofread or interpret. Learning how to better craft a story. My writing style may not be someone else's comprehension style. Yep, that's good. What others read. Balance the flowery words, show your excitement, but not being too flowery. Stay professional. Absolutely. All right, good. So I'm going to share the screen again and bring that whiteboard back that we talked about our challenges. And I just want to kind of click through those to make sure I covered them well enough for you. May include too much detail. I think we've talked about that, about how you just want to answer the question and in the amount they have provided, and you want just enough detail to really support that big idea that you have. Hard to come up with match. This can be confusing. I don't know. Does anyone have anything they want to say about match? Especially those of you who have applied for match. Do you have any strategies or thoughts about lessons learned about applying for match?
I'm going to jump in here, Kathy, and say that in what I do, because I'm part of the reserve system, a lot of my stuff, I'm federally funded, and then I'm applying for federally funds, and sometimes I'm applying for state funds and things like that. And you have to pay a lot of close attention to how you're already funded and where your new funding is coming from, and make sure those requirements for match work. And that also at DNR, we do a lot of match with folks' salary. So they sort of do like an in-kind for a match, and we also can use volunteer hours as match, and they count for the volunteers are like $27 an hour or something ridiculous. So they count for a lot of match for some of our grants, but it seems pretty specific to where you work and the specific grant proposal about what is and is not allowed.
Great. That's excellent, Abby. Thank you for those insights. That's great. One thing I love about these trainings, and I always try to make room for people to share their ideas, because, we have richness and experience in this class today. And so they go, many people way beyond the experience I have with grant writing. So I love to hear from you. So thank you for sharing. Okay, allocating or finding enough funds for the administrative work. Again, I think you just need to demonstrate why that needs to be covered and make a good case for it. They know that most funding agencies know there's got to be some administrative work involved there. Hard to find time to write grants with everything else. Well, that is definitely a reality. And I think the thing that's ultimately going to save you time, or make sure that at least the time you spend is well spent, is to make sure that your idea meshes really well with the funding agency. And if you have any questions, to contact the contact for that grant, and make sure that you're on track and that your idea is going to work before you and your team sink too many hours into preparing the grant proposal. Sometimes hard to find a project that is sexy enough to get funding. That it can be true. And so I'd say, again, anytime you can, grab their attention, paint a picture, show how it impacts your community. It doesn't always have to be terribly sexy, but it needs to be well explained, and make sure your big idea is really out there and clear. And then getting corroboration from other staff members, managing the logistics. I just want to say that sometimes, I know in the reserve system, the Science Collaborative, who's the one who is the granting body for the reserve system, they require that people have a facilitator to facilitate the team of people who are applying for the grant. And I know not every grant requires that, but it's something to think about, of getting a facilitator at least for those first few meetings, to make sure everyone's back on the same page, everybody's excited. Maybe months have gone by since you put the proposal in, and then when you hear the answer. So I think that's good. And I'm going to ask Abby to weigh in, because I think, Abby, you've had some experience with this as well.
With getting collaboration from staff members and managing logistics. Yes, so there is a grant process that I get involved in a lot called Science Collaborative Funding. And you have this whole, it's all about things being end user driven, and everybody's got to be involved in everything. And it takes a lot longer than you think. And then you have to be really, really, really organized. So everybody's got to follow the filing system, and everyone needs to report out their work at the agreed upon times. Otherwise, it's really, really hard to get that. And that is one thing I'm going to say. I feel like there's not enough time between when they announce these grants and when your proposal is due to run around to do all this collaborating. It takes so much time. I'm writing one right now, and I'm just constantly bugging people, being like, "Can you get back to me right now?" Which is annoying. I recognize.
Yes,
but it can be done.
That's right. Great. And does anybody else have anything related to these topics that they would like to share, or any tips you found for collaboration and cooperating with your team? Just raise your hand or type in the chat, either one. Looks like someone says, what is the difference between soft and hard match? I think hard match is dollars, isn't it? And soft match is like time, people's time. That's my understanding of it.
Yeah, I can speak a little bit on this one. So like Abby was saying, a lot of what we use for our match in the reserve system. Hi, I'm Jess. I work with Abby as a stewardship coordinator.
Hi, Jess.
And yeah, so we use either people's time, volunteer time. We also use, like with the state, we purchase a lot of land, and so we have equity in that land. So that all of that would be considered soft. Versus hard is yes, like actual funds that you can match with.
Great, thank you. So this is the time. We have a few minutes left in our training, and this is really the time for questions, any more questions you might have, and time to share your wisdom. So are there any burning questions that anybody has? Kat.
Okay, I missed one of the questions earlier, so I'm sorry if this is redundant. But some of the presentations I've been to are not PowerPoint presentations necessarily. It's just kind of going up and speaking to a group of people. In that case, do you feel like it's beneficial to have handouts or some sort of visual still, or just focus on talking?
It depends on how much kind of, pertinent information you want them to take home with them. if it's mainly to get their attention about your support, it might just simply be getting up and telling your story that you figured out and that key message, what you're asking for. That may be enough. But if you're getting into some of the details, you definitely want to hand out, because just hearing that from a talking head, people are not going to remember it. Great question. Anybody else?
I had a question.
Okay. Sean?
So, you highlighted that you should be clear and concise in your proposals, but then also some of the videos that you showed said that you want to make sure that it's not one sentence answers, that it's very detailed. So if an RFP, let's say, is a 10-page maximum, do you suggest trying to reach that 10 pages, or if you can get it concise in 6 pages or something like that, would you suggest that, or is there any kind of insight to that?
I'll be curious what other people say about this. In my experience, you end up feeling like you don't even hardly have enough room, even for the 10 pages, because of all the criteria they want you to talk about. And so I'm going to say it might vary. It probably gets back to your grant and how simple your ask is. Is it fairly simple? Is it more complex, where you would definitely need those 10 pages? I would say just you want to just make sure your proposal is well written and it's clear and succinct. And it might work out that you don't use the whole amount, and otherwise you might feel like you've bumped all the way to the very end. I don't think there's one is better than the other. The main thing is you want to be thorough, but you just want to be clear and succinct and not go off and bring in too many outside facts. Anybody else want to address Sean's question?
I actually asked this question at a very similar seminar for a specific foundation, and they said, if you feel like you're starting to come up with things to fill in that empty space, then it's just going to get redundant and muddled. Like, obviously, if you've only written a page out of 10, maybe consider if you're missing something. But they said, if it feels like you're making things up, it's going to make the people who are reading it kind of drift away and not pay as much attention. So it's better to just answer all the questions, like you said, and not try and just fill up the space to fill up the space.
Thank you, Kat. Great. Anybody else? Oh, I see a question in the chat. Where is a good place to look for grants, or a good starting place? I know that there are sites where you can go to that will help funnel you in toward a grant, the different grant foundations. Your agency or foundation or nonprofit may have other funders that they've worked with. I think asking around is good. But again, there are definitely resources online where you can go and you can plug in your topic, and there we go. I knew there was one. Thank you, Meg. So there's one right there that's specific to South Carolina. Perfect.
And we can actually, I think there is a training that goes along with that resource that Meg put in. So if that is of interest to people, we can bring something like that too.
Great. Someone made a point of making sure that if you use photographs of people, be sure and get their presentations right, and give credit to your photos if you have photos in there that you're using for someone else. Great. Awesome. There's some good resources there. Pamela.
So I kind of want to address the flip side of Sean's question.
Okay.
A lot of times it's hard to fit it all in. I did a training on survey design, which I think is applicable here, where you have to ask yourself why?
Mm-hmm.
And it can help you hone in on what are you truly trying to ask for, what your project goals are, and that'll help you kind of narrow down your narrative a bit.
I love it. That's great advice. Thank you. Very good. And remember, you also get to have supporting materials. There's the application, and then there's a place for you to add supporting materials and files and photos and maps and that sort of thing. So you will have opportunity beyond just the proposal format to offer ideas. But I love that keep asking yourself why and simmer it down. You cut out anything extraneous. And once you figure out your big idea, that really makes it easier to know what to get rid of. All right, any more questions? Getting lots of thank yous. I really appreciate that. Glad that you're finding it helpful. While we're having a little lull here, I'm going to invite Abby to put the survey for this class into the chat. And we always appreciate she has to do reporting for the Coastal Training Program. It's helpful for me to know. This is a brand new class, really. This is only the second time I've offered it. It's fresh, really a fresh class. So I always appreciate hearing your comments. And also there's a perk. I always offer a perk. When I was coordinating a Coastal Training Program here in Washington, I started doing this then, and I've continued it now. And that is, if you fill out the survey and you if you put your name in the survey, or if you want to remain anonymous, send a note to Abby. She'll put a list together, and then I'll do a drawing just from that list for a free future training. And so it's just from the people who we have the names from this class. So your odds for winning are much better than the state lottery, and you'll get a future class. And I actually have a couple ones coming up that I'm offering directly with open registration. So anyway, good perk here for you. All right.
Thanks so much for that reminder, Kathy. So I put the evaluation link in the chat. I will also be sending out a follow-up email that will have that link again, and a link to that grant foundation thing that just popped in, as well as any resources from today. If you want to be in Kathy's drawing, just shoot me an email. I do like to keep my evaluations anonymous. And then also, if you need a certificate of attendance, please shoot me an email. I do keep a record of everybody who attends. So if that's just good and you can just say you came, that's great. But if you need a certificate, I'm happy to send you one. And I put my email in the chat as well.
Thank you, Abby. And just one last thing. I'd love to just do a screenshot of people who took this class so that, Abby can put it in her reporting, and maybe some of you would want to include it. So if everybody who would like to be in a photo, turn your videos back on. We'll do a photo here. All these beautiful faces. Beautiful and handsome. All right, I think we have everybody here. So on the count of 3, now remember, you want to look in your camera, and so it looks like you're looking at the viewer. So on the count of 3, 1, 2, 3. All right, very good. Thank you, everybody. You're a fabulous group as always, and I look forward to seeing you in the future training. Thank you so much for Abby for sponsoring this training, and have a great rest of your day.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Yeah. Bye.